Hey everyone, I'm Tara from Wild Bird Farm. I garden here in Zone 5 in central Iowa. Today, as I am putting together loosely my spring crop plan, I thought I'd bring you along and also talk quite a bit about growing hardy annuals in the Midwest. I am going into my 5th year growing for profit and my 6th year overall growing hardy annuals. And I've picked up quite a bit along the way. You may be familiar with more southern growers who swear by 6 to 8 weeks before your last frost. So they are planting out their plants up to 8 weeks, 2 months before their last frost. And while I completely agree that hardy annuals love the cool weather, here where I'm at, a couple of factors play into things where my window is closer to 2 to 4 weeks before my last frost. So let's dig in and talk a bit about those kind of outside peripheral things that I have learned in the last few years as I've been growing hardy annuals. The biggest thing for me is the wind. Our spring winds are harsh and hard, and they can do some serious damage to plants. The second consideration is it's a little bit tricky to harden off your hardy annuals. And believe me, they really need to be hardened off before you are putting these sweet, tender baby plants out in the elements. So one thing that I have found works great is sort of a cold frame setup, but that is a lot of manual on and off, or at least it can be. So those are just a couple of considerations for you to think about as you are counting back the weeks before your last frost. If you're wanting to push the envelope and you're thinking, I'm going for 6 weeks, and you are in a protected area, maybe you're in more of an urban growing space where you have a lot of natural buildings or trees, something that has almost given you a little bit of a micro growing climate. That would be one great reason to push the envelope. If you don't get a lot of wind in your area. For me, the way that I have found that I can push the envelope is with hoops and row covers and unheated high tunnels. So with all of the wind that we have, I had to learn how to appropriately keep a low tunnel on. But those do provide protection, more so even from the cold elements, but for me from the wind elements. If you can somewhat keep that blustery wind off those little plant starts, that really sets you ahead. I have a story that I've talked about before. I wanted to go big with sweet peas, probably my 2nd or 3rd year growing. I had my husband pound in an entire, I think it was a 50-foot row of T-posts. I had big plans for these sweet peas. I had grown them successfully in my high tunnel and I was moving them outside. Well, I thought I hardened them off, or I thought I hardened them off well, I should say. They were just completely beaten and battered by the wind. The little green, the green matter that I planted out there quickly turned white just from all of that wind and cold pressure. Some of them completely died off. Some were still there when I checked when it was a little bit warmer. But it was just, they had been knocked back to nothing. So they really had to start from the ground up, as you'd say. So I think looking back, I would have been better off pre-sprouting my sweet peas in a paper towel and popping those in the ground and having them grow from the very beginning outside, just so they could try and acclimate to those harsh springs. That's just an example. This could happen with a lot of plants. Now there's some that I have noticed can take a beating, and we will talk about those as we go through my spring crop plan. One that sticks out to me is agrostemma. You can plant that stuff out, it can get beat up, and it's still going to push beautiful blooms. So you may have to play around with things a little bit in your area. And again, I'm in zone 5, so I think this thought process is really relevant to those in my zone, as well as probably a zone 4 up to a zone 6. Anywhere outside of that, you probably have some different considerations to think about. Just a few administrative details before we dig into the seeds. So I am not fancy. I do not use spreadsheets. I don't even precisely plan out row by row. Now I do know the space that I have both outdoors and in my hoop house. I know about how many square feet that is, and I can figure out how many plants I'm needing to start from seed. But I don't make an exact crop plan on an Excel spreadsheet. I have to be on the computer all day for my day job, and that's just not something I enjoy enough to be doing with crop plans. So I am a paper and pen type of gal. What I do enjoy is using a calendar each year. I find this is a really simple way year over year to make some notes and to see what worked well last year when my memory fails me. So this is last year's calendar, and in January, I reviewed it and kind of reminded myself when I planted some certain things out. So very first on my list, I have anemones, and shortly after I have ranunculus. Now those aren't specifically hardy annuals, but since they're on my calendar, I took note of that, and those are one of the few things I have already done this year and marked on this year's calendar. Some other things that I started last year early on was scented stock. And I actually have my grow lights in my home just to my right here. And I can kind of do a pan at the end, but the only thing I have over there right now are two 128 cell trays of scented stock. I'm going pretty big on the iron pink and the iron marine. So I have one 128 cell tray of each. And depending on the room I have out in my hoop house, I feel like it might not have room for too much more, but I like to do a second succession of that in a few weeks. So stock is one of those early January annuals that I like to get started. Now keep in mind that one does go in my unheated high tunnel. Sweet William is another one that is just tough as nails. I'm actually not starting any of that this year. I have some overwintering in my old hoop house, and I planted out plugs last year, last fall, to have spring blooms this year. So that's kind of the other thing about hardy annuals here that we'll touch upon. Some of these, as we're talking, I planted out plugs or I direct sowed last year. I like to kind of hedge my bets and do some in the fall if they are cold hardy to my zone, meaning they'll overwinter here. But otherwise, I do a late winter or very early spring planting. Canterbury bells was another one I did last year. I'm not doing those this year only because of space, but I did start those, looks like the second week of January last year. This year, I am doing foxglove in my unheated tunnel in place of that. I just have limited space, and I've never grown foxglove, so I'm starting that this year. Snaps are also something I'm not starting this year because, again, I fall planted an entire 40-foot row in my tunnel. I have found here for me, I get great early snap crops from my tunnel. And then outside, I usually get one early crop. Sometimes it kind of bleeds over when I'm not really needing a crop. So this year, I'm going to see how I do without snaps outside. Bells of Ireland, I'm also not doing this year, but that's another great one to start early. A trick for that is to start the seeds on a wet paper towel. They seem to germinate quite well that way, and then you can just pop them in your seed starting cells. Ceranth is another great one, and I have sweet peas on here. And just a few days ago, I had been pre-sprouting my sweet peas again on a damp paper towel, and then I just potted those up recently. They're actually out in our shop in my grow area out there. I have some lights, and they're hanging out between 45 and 50 degrees because they like it so cool. Let's see here. All right, we talked about a lot of those. All right, I think I have all of that. I'm also not starting feverfew this year because I did so much fall planting of it last year that I think I'm going to have quite a bit from that. If you enjoy growing chamomile for bouquets, that would be another good one. I'm trying to think. Let's see. Bachelor's buttons I direct sowed in the fall. I actually have quite a list here of cold loving annuals that I like to direct sow. So maybe we can hop in and talk about that. First, I have poppies. I have a whole video on how I love to just go out, probably in the last-ish snow of the season, so it'll probably be late February, and I just sprinkle the poppy seeds on top of the snow. And for some reason, that snow, as it melts, it brings those seeds down to ground level where the seeds like to hang out, and they germinate great for me. Last fall, I direct sowed a lot of larkspur, nigella, orlea, and bupleurum. Now, having said that, I have seeds. Actually, I have quite a bit of saved seed of each of those, and I will be direct sowing more here. Let's just check my calendar from last year, sometime in February. Okay, so it looks like I direct sowed cress, bupleurum, forget-me-nots, larkspur, orlea, nigella, and dara, all mid-February last year. And looking back, I had good crops on all of those, so I think that will be my plan again this year. Let's see, in early February, we're gonna hop back just a little bit. I like to start lupin. I love that. I now have a pretty thick row of it, so this year I am not planning to start any from seed. Let's see, I have the chamomile on here. I like the Kelway. If you've never looked into Kelway chamomile, it's fully orange or kind of like a dark yellow. It's kind of just a different look in bouquets. I enjoy that one. That one, again, I'll just direct sow out in a cleared garden bed. Back to cool loving flowers that I would want to start from seed. Scabiosa and Scabiosa stellata, the one that looks like the ping pong ball. Both of those, I think I'm not gonna grow Scabiosa this year. I'm really focusing on doing more of less blooms. Less types, but more of certain varieties. And I just don't get a ton of bang for my buck when I'm putting together a huge volume of retail bouquets from Scabiosa. So that one I'm gonna skip. We talked about feverfew. If I was going to start those from seed in the spring, I'd be starting those between now and early February. Let's see, it looks like I did my second round of stock about 3 weeks after my first one last year. And then also in early February, agrostema. Again, it's a rock star. I like to start a flat and have one to plant out. So let's see, if I started in early February, I'm planting it out the 1st of March, which is a full month before my last frost. So I would say, really with the exception of agrostema and maybe bupleurum, a lot of the things I'm direct sowing anymore that are super hardy that you could plant out that full month before your last frost, at least what I've found here in the Midwest. But going back to agrostema or corncockle, I like to start a tray and plant it out in little plugs, and then I come about 3 weeks later and I direct sow another grouping. Those grow really good from direct seeding. Okay, and then towards later in February, these were a few things I found didn't need to be started quite so early. The first couple years that I grew them, I started them so early that I was having to bump them up into like single cells because they just had so much mass on them. And that is Status and Strawflower. So those are both pretty hardy, and they are also going to go out probably mid-ish March. Let me see if I wrote down. I didn't write down exactly when I put those out. But on here, it looks like I started them towards the end of February last year. So I'm guessing I planted them out the end of March. That's Status and Strawflower. They grow pretty quickly for me, but they are cold hardy, so it's pretty flexible. If you're having a really cold week, just hold them in another week and then plant them out after. Let's see, so that kind of ran through all the hardy annuals I'm planting to plant this year and those on my calendar from last year. If you have questions about any others that you're thinking about planting, drop them below, or I have a quick link that I will add at the end and also down in the description area I made a very quick form. It's completely free. All you have to do is put in your name, your email, and your question. So if you have a little bit more detailed question or maybe a couple of separate questions, I'm answering those for free. Just fill out, I think there's 3 boxes to fill out, and those will come to me and I'll try and get back to you relatively quickly on those. So one other note, for a lot of my seeds that I like to direct sow or start that love a cool start, I often keep them in the fridge or the freezer. I haven't found either make a difference. Right now I've got this bag in my fridge. It's just some things that I know like to have a cold period. So I have Nigella in here, I have larkspur, I have columbine, but that's really a perennial. I have cress, several times a cress. I have saponaria. That's one I've never grown that I'm going to try direct sowing this year. And then several types of nigella. So similar, if you're familiar with planting perennials and they sometimes need that cold stratification period, this is what we're accomplishing by putting our seeds. I put them in up to a month. It really doesn't hurt them, but I'd say at least 2 weeks before you plan to get them going. Just a couple other notes as we wrap up here. Johnny's Selected Seeds, even if you haven't bought your seeds from them, they have really great growing directions on the back of their seed packets. They also have a lot of information online. They will often tell you if a plant wants a cool start, and they will say things like, sow them so many weeks before a cold frost, or likes to be direct sown as soon as the soil can be worked. So there's some key phrases that you can pick up that's going to help you determine if what you have is a hardy annual and just how hardy it is or could be to your zone. Lastly, just a reminder, I am in zone 5, so you may need to modify this a bit depending on where you're at. It's quite simple to do. What you need to know is your last expected frost date, and that is easy enough just by Googling your zip code. Mine used to be the second week in May, like May 12th. Well, that has bumped up to May 1st. So the last information that came out was May 1. So that is the date that I go by. But I think last year we didn't have a frost much after the first week in April. So the good thing about starting seeds, and especially direct sowing, is you can be pretty flexible with your timing. Generally, you can hold started seeds in plug trays over a week. Just make sure you're doing fertilizer as needed, or having them sit out an extra week to get hardened off really well is usually a great idea as well. So I would say watch your weather. If it's going to be extremely windy and extremely cold one week, I would hold them over. Even day to day as I'm hardening off, I am always looking at which way the wind is coming from. We have a protected area on the back of our house. We have a little bit of a protected area on the front of our house. And then I can also use our outbuilding, 1 or 2 sides of that depending. So it's really important to know how windy it's going to be and what direction the wind's coming from when you're setting out your little baby transplants to harden off. Just something to think about. All right, I feel like I have been rambling for a while. I feel like I'm losing my voice here, but I know there's a lot I didn't cover and there's probably questions. So be sure to use that question box link below to send them or drop them in the comments, and I am more than happy to try and answer. Until next time. And here are my 2 stock trays that have not germinated yet.